Well, hello, everybody. I hope your Tuesday is going well, especially mid-July. My husband had the rather humbling awareness yesterday that half the year is over and half the summer is almost over. So hopefully things are going well with you. We have about a minute before we are going to officially start, but I want to say hello to everybody. If you have a chance, please share with us via the chat or the question area what company you're from. That would be great to know. A couple of things before we get started. It is officially 1 o'clock. I'm going to do some light introductions and then just a couple of notes for you. But I want to welcome you to this week's webinar. This has been part of an ongoing series by the Association of Catholic Publishers to continue to provide opportunities for you to learn and grow in your professional work. This particular topic is one that we have visited numerous times in the past. The really great thing is that not only do we have our usual expert, Mary Sperry, back with us, but we are also recording the session. So if there are other people that you work with in your company or in kind of just your peer area who have questions about this topic area, this video will be posted at the webinars page at the catholicpublishers.org website, probably within an hour or two after we're concluded. There is in the handout section a handout, which is actually the PowerPoint slides. So please feel free to download them. A link to those PowerPoint slides will also be with the video. So if you don't do it now, you can do it later. And just so you know, we have another webinar that is scheduled for next week. If you haven't taken a look at what that is, please feel free to do so and sign up for that if that would be of interest to you as well. For those of you who are from ACP member publishing houses, we have our peer groups that are ongoing. So if you go to peer groups at catholicpublishers.org, you will see links so that you can register for your peer group, your peer group's future meeting. So that's the announcements. Again, thank you all for coming. And now I want to introduce Mary to you, and she's going to take over and run with this. So Mary Sperry is the goddess chief elf of all things Catholic permissions. If you don't know Mary, then you should. Because Mary is an incredible resource. She is a font of knowledge that escapes many of us. But her most authoritative and highest expertise are in the areas of permissions and scripture. She's the New American Bible lady as well as the permissions lady. And I've had the pleasure of working with Mary for over 10 years. And I think you are going to enjoy this presentation. It's a lot of information. Don't get overwhelmed. Mary has a really good knack of taking crazy information and making it easy to get through and easy to remember. So with that, I'm going to be turning my microphone and camera off, so you will hear Mary only, and we will get started. So thank you all. Please use the questions in the chat if you have any.
Can you all hear me?
I think that's a yes.
Okay, because I lost you and it went very quiet. Okay, and I've been having some trouble with my Wi-Fi, so we're all going to say a really quick prayer to St. Isidore of Seville that my Wi-Fi will continue operating properly. I'll take acronyms for 1,000, Alex. I'm a huge Jeopardy fan, and I really did seriously consider animating this to the Jeopardy theme song, but the Jeopardy theme song is actually under copyright, and it's not in one license. I checked. Basically, the issue here is who's who in Catholic publishing. You know you should get permission when you use other people's work, especially if you're using beyond the fair use requirements. But the issue is, how do you know who to go to? Next slide. Knowing who's who can be challenging. Everybody that you're probably almost everybody you're going to need permission from has an acronym. And those of us who do this all the time have a tendency to throw those acronyms out like everybody knows who they are. And some of you may know this. In my past life, I was a Soviet specialist. I studied Soviet political and Soviet politics, economics, and science policy, especially. And I can remember sitting in classes on Soviet military policy, which were one of my prerequisites, and people would be talking in acronyms, slickums and blickums and things like that, which are different kinds of missiles. And I would look at them just like, I have no idea what you're saying. I know it's not Russian because I speak that language. Could you possibly define what you're saying? It got to the point by the end of the semester that every time somebody used an acronym, they just turn and look at me and define it. So what we're going to do here today is the same thing for Catholic permissions. We're going to try to take this alphabet soup that is the acronyms of who's who in Catholic publishing and break them out a little bit so you know who they are, what they deal with, and how to reach out to them, and the sort of information you should be providing to them when you make your request. That's what we're going to look at doing here today. I've been doing this for the USCCB for 23 and a half years at this point, which it just doesn't seem that long, yet other days it seems like much longer. So we'll turn to the next slide and we'll look at the first one, which is Libreria Editrice Vaticana, also known as the LEV, L-E-V. It's the Vatican Publishing House. They have been established since 1926, which 94 years old. I dare say we'll be getting ready for their 100th anniversary soon, which will be quite the festivity, I expect. Currently, they are part of the Dicastery of Communications with the Vatican. So everything that happens there will go through the Dicastery for Communications. It's not an independent, separate organization anymore. It's underneath that bigger branch. They handle all papal texts, all curial texts, and all former copyrights were given to them. Of course, before they got in a memorandum back in 2005, any contracts that existed before that stay in force, of course, but anything new goes to them. So if you want to use something that's on the Vatican website, if you want to quote a papal document, if you want to quote a curial text that's been translated, they are a good first step, other than the things I'll talk about later in this discussion. So to the LEV, when you approach them, they're always going to want to know your print run and your list price. So it will save you time if you just give them that up front. Say, we want to use 45, we want to use 450 words from Evangelii Gaudium and 700 words from Rejoice and Be Glad and 1,000 words from Amoris Laetitia. In our book, lots of good stuff Pope Francis said, and we're going to print 2,000 copies and charge $19.95. If you give them that information up front, your answer will get back to you much more quickly. And you won't have to go back 3 and 4 times with information. Given the fact that, there's a time, you're always going to have the time delay, and that they're exceptionally busy, and they're all working from home too, anything you can do to decrease the number of emails back and forth will save you time. The director of Libreria Editrice Vaticana is a lovely conventual Franciscan, Father Julio Cesario. Yes, his name means Julius Caesar. Yes, we tease him about that. The rights manager is Dr. Francesca Angeletti. Both of them speak beautiful English. You can send all of your requests to Dr. Angeletti in English. It's very easy. Her email is just her first name dot her last name at spc.va. Very easy. And she is very responsive to emails. Typically, she will write back to you within a week, which if you work with commercial agencies, you know how fast that is. I've sent an email 6 weeks ago. I'm still waiting to hear that they got it. So the Lev is really fast. Their preference is typically for small things, is typically for a one-time fee. They'll send you an agreement to an invoice and you can electronically pay them. It's pretty fast, pretty easy, and we have found them really lovely to work with. They're super fast and efficient. Turning to the next slide. ISIL, the International Commission on English in the Liturgy. They're the copyright holder for all English translations of liturgical texts. So if it's a liturgical text and it's in English, even if it's posted somewhere on the Vatican website, go to ISIL, not LEV. Latin text, you go to LEV. But if you want the general instruction of the Roman Missal, or any of the liturgical texts, the Roman Missal itself, the Book of Blessings, the Rite of Penance, the Order of Baptism of Children, you get the idea. And interestingly enough, almost all of them have acronyms. You'll go to ISIL. They're a mixed commission of 11 member conferences and 15 associate members. So basically, if English is used as a liturgical language with any kind of regularity in your country, you're probably either a full member or an associate member. The full members are places where English is a dominant language. The US, Canada, England and Wales, Scotland, Ireland, New Zealand, Australia, India. You get the picture. But places like Sri Lanka, Kenya, Pakistan will be associate members because they do use English, just it's not necessarily their dominant liturgical language. An important thing to note about ISIL, all of their contracts are contingent. That means that the contract is not valid until and unless you receive permission from the local Episcopal Conference. Their licensed territory is limited to those conferences where you have approval. So that means if you're doing a book that has a couple of quotes from the general instruction of the Roman Missal, no one's going to care deeply. If you're producing a liturgical aid, say a guide for participants at baptism, or a little booklet on penance that people would carry into the, for people receiving their first penance would carry in to the confessional with them, or a children's missal for first communion. These are the things that are off the top of my head. Those are going to be limited by territory. If you want to produce it in the US, you're going to have permission from the Bishop's Committee on Divine Worship, BCDW for an acronym, to get permission to sell it in the US. You don't have permission to sell it, even if you have permission of the BCDW, you don't have permission to sell it across the border in Canada, unless you get a permission from the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops, the CCCB. As a rule, each bishop's conference holds their own texts within their own country. So they don't want something produced for the US to be sold in Canada or to be sold in England or in Australia. Some conferences don't care as much. They don't have internal publishing. There aren't a whole lot of English Catholic publishers in, say, Pakistan. It's a fairly limited number. They may not have an issue with allowing a publisher to import. They also don't have as much of a market. But other countries, they want to preserve the market for their own publishers or to use their own texts. They don't want the text approved for another country to be flooding their country. And liturgical calendars are different. I mean, I do work with other countries, who use the NAB, and like the Philippines, the NAB is their liturgical text. So, their liturgical calendar is quite different. Mexico's liturgical calendar is quite different. Today is one of those differences. Today in the United States, it is an obligatory memorial of St. Kateri Tekakwitha. Thank God she's finally a saint, 8 years now. But we don't have, that her memorial is not celebrated in other countries. Canada, yes, but not so much in Mexico or Pakistan or Australia. So we do need to be very respectful of the rights of other countries in that regard. You do want to allow, when you request those permissions, extra time for 2 reasons. One, they do require review of proofs. So you're going to have to send your proofs to get reviewed by them. That takes some time, depending on how busy they are. If they've got a huge backlog, that could take a while. And they do receive proofs by email, especially now since, once again, we're all working remotely. But also, once they're done, you have to get permission, or at the same time, you have to get permission from the Committee on Divine Worship in the United States. You can submit simultaneously, but you do want to make sure that you're submitting to both and you're allowing yourself time to get to hear back from both. Otherwise, you get the nasty little surprise of not having permission when you need to go to press. And none of us like that. I know already this year, one client I've worked with had to delay their book by a full year because it's a seasonal book, and they didn't allow themselves enough time for the review up front, so they missed their season. So they now have to wait an entire year to get that book into press. No one wants that. The authors don't want it. The publishers don't want it. We all want new product to be selling. You can't be, you hate to miss a season like that. But if you don't allow enough time, that could end up being what happens. So I just want to caution against that. So the next slide, something that will save you time. CEM, Conferencia de Episcopado Mexicano, the Mexican Episcopal Conference. They control the copyright on all Mexican liturgical texts, the ritual books, the leccionario, which is still the one most commonly used in the US. They do not hold the copyright on the translation of the Psalms that is most commonly used in the US. That one is held by Spain, the Episcopal Conference of Spain. They don't have a handy little acronym. Now, what will save you time when it comes to the Mexican Episcopal text is those permissions are administered through the USCCB, which in this case means me. So you can send your excerpts from the Misa Romano, from the Ritual de Bautismo de los Niños, the Ritual de Matrimonio, Rito de Penitencia, pardon me. I actually can speak a little Spanish. I apologize. You can send those to me, and I can actually grant the permissions for use in the United States. If you want to work outside the United States, you still need to go to Mexico. But for anything published within the United States, and to be distributed within the United States, I can grant those permissions. And in all honesty, it tends to be faster. For the Psalms from Spain, you do still need to go to Spain. And at least right now, they are not responding. They have been on an even more serious lockdown than most of the rest of Europe. And we have not been able to get a response from them for over a month and a half. So right now, that's a little bit delayed. But for anything else, Spanish liturgical, please feel free to come to me. We'll get to Spanish Bibles later. Turning to the next slide, and to my kind and generous employer. Somebody please mention to my boss I said that. USCCB, as you might expect, holds the copyright on all USCCB texts. So any of the statements of the bishops, we would handle those. We do require, like ISIL, we require a review of proofs if you're using more than 10% of a USCCB text, or if the USCCB text is more than 10% of your work. Anything under that, we don't need to see it. Any translation of an existing USCCB text requires prior approval of the Bishops' Committee and their review of the translation. So if you have a desperate desire to translate something into Vietnamese or Korean or Polish or, I don't know, French, whatever it might be, you need to request that before you start your work. So, and allow plenty of time for that. It is amazing the number of people who are like, but we plan to sell this next week. And my response to them is, guess not, because the committee has to look at this first. And we can't even get the committee's opinion in a week. I mean, trying to get on bishops' agendas in under a week requires an act of God. Or you need to be the Pope. He can do it. I can't. Also, just so you note, we never grant permission for a full statement for it at least 1 year after it's been published, after it was approved by the body. So, for example, Open Wide Our Hearts, the pastoral letter on racism, that's now been out 1.5 years. But for the first year, no one was allowed to print that in its entirety except the USCCB. After that year's up, we do grant permissions for compilations and commentaries and things like that. So just a handy thing for you to note when you're making requests. In terms of timeline, we do our very best to get as much as is humanly possible out the door within 20 business days. For publishers that are doing major works, we do our very best to get them out within 15. However, due to the pandemic, we are short an entire staff person, and we are still clearing backlog from when I had no staff for 4 months. Actually, 5. I had no proofreader for 6 months. We're still clearing up that backlog. Hopefully that will be gone by the end of this month. That is the goal. And then we'll be back on target, and we'll hope to keep things to within 15 to 20 days. But please, if it's an emergency, we'll do our best. But, please keep in mind that I have very little sanity left, and anything you can do to help me to preserve that tiny amount is most appreciated. Some additional USCCB things to keep in mind on the next slide. The USCCB also manages the sublicensing of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the Compendium of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and the brand new Directory of Catechesis, just released not even a month ago, and first copies will roll out next week. We have both of those, all of those 3 things rather, in English and Spanish. And technically, we also do the licensing for the Catechism in French in the United States. In the 24 years I've been doing this, I have handled exactly 0 permissions for that. But if you ever have a desperate need to print something in French that includes the Catechism, do please feel free to contact me. Like I said, no one ever asks, but it's there. We will have the Directory for Catechesis in English and Spanish. The Spanish translation is coming now. We should have that into production fairly soon. And it won't be out next week like the English will, because the translation was just behind the English. But we will get that out as soon as possible. And we've made an agreement with the Holy See that we will actually be able to handle those permissions within the United States. So you won't have to go to Rome for those. You will be able to come to me. The 2 other agencies you need to be aware of. I mentioned before the Bishops' Committee on Divine Worship. They do need to sign off on any liturgical permissions. That is a requirement. So you can go to them directly. You can have me send it to them if you want, but you can also approach them directly. It's really easy to find them. divineworship@usccb.org. It's really easy to track them down. If you'd like, you can copy me on those emails, and That way I'm aware of the fact that it's out there and when they got it. And if you don't hear back from them quickly, I can nudge for you. And I'm happy to do that for our publisher. But they are ultimately the people who have to say yes or no. Sorry, had to refuel. Got a little dry there. There's also the subcommittee on the catechism. Those of you who are catechetical publishers know them well and their review of Basil textbook series. For other publishers, you may never need to have interaction with them. You only need to request permission for the catechism if you are using more than 5,000 words of the catechism. I'm going to be honest, that's a lot of words. Most publishers don't use that many words. Just don't. On the other hand, if you do use 5,000 words or more from the catechism, there are 2 levels of approval that are required. First, it goes through my office to ensure its accuracy. That generally happens within the typical 15 to 20 days. Once the text is perfect, it goes to the subcommittee on the catechism for what is called a consistency review. The consistency review doesn't go through the protocol like a Basil series does. It is just reviewed by a theological advisor or staff, and then reviewed by a bishop typically, to ensure that the content of the text is consistent with the content of the catechism. You would be surprised. This is not generally a problem that we have with publishers who are likely to be on this call, but as I'm sure you all realize, we are now in a world where anybody with a computer can publish books on Amazon, can publish an ebook, and you'd be surprised some of the things that I see that just, kind of blatant heresy right in the middle of the page. The catechism subcommittee is going to catch stuff like that and make people change things before it gets published. I alert you to this because that is a time-consuming process. On average, that review can take as much as 6 to 9 months, not weeks, months. It depends on how much is in the queue before it gets them, because their priority is to work on conformity and catechetical series. So these tend not to go through quite as fast. And so if you're going to use a lot of catechism in something, as a publisher, you need to start that work well out in advance. Or you need to drop to under 5,000 words. Knowing that walking in the door makes your jobs a lot easier. To the next slide, where we have the Abbey Psalms and Canticles, the APC, not the ACP, that's this organization, the APC, formerly known as the RGP. Not only do they have an acronym, they have a former acronym. These used to be the Revised Grail Psalms. Last year, on July 1st, the USCCB purchased the copyright for these psalms, and they were renamed in honor of the monks of Conception Abbey who did the editorial work on this particular translation. Also, they included the liturgical canticles, which are used in the Liturgy of the Hours, and they're part of this collection. They have been published as a separate collection now, and they are approved for liturgical use, and they are being incorporated into liturgical books as they are revised. So far, just because you might not have had enough acronyms lately, they're in the OCM, the OBC, and the OCBA, also known as the Order for Celebrating Matrimony, the Order of Baptism of Children, and the Order, it should be ODCA, pardon me, I'm a little dyslexic here, the Order of Dedication of a Church and Altar. Ultimately, the APC will be the sole liturgical version of the Psalms and Canticles. Right now, it's not. The lectionary, for example, still uses the New American Bible 1970 Psalms. but ultimate, and the Liturgy of the Hours uses the original Grail of Psalms. Ultimately, the LOH, the Liturgy of the Hours, and the Lectionary for Mass, the LFM, will both use the APC. So what those will, we know pretty much what they're going to look like in the Liturgy of the Hours. We don't know what they're going to look like in the lectionary right now. We do have a responsorial psalm version of for the volume 1 of the lectionary, but it is provisional. It will not be the final version that is in the lectionary. We know that because things that were in error in the 1998 edition of the lectionary will be corrected in the new lectionary. We know that, we have them done, we have them ready to go. They'll be fixed. But having two sets of psalms that contradict each other to be used at the same time is more than confusing for people. The other possibility that remains out there is that the psalm refrains might be retranslated so that they align more closely with the APC. We don't know that yet. The bishops of the United States have to make a decision about that yet, and then the Holy See would have to affirm that decision. So we don't know what they're going to look like. All we know is they're not going to look like what they are now. That is the most up-to-date information I can unfortunately give you on that issue. Abbey Psalms and Canticles, if you have a desire to use them, those requests come through me. If they're for anything liturgical, they are also referred to the Committee on Divine Worship. But if it's just you're a music publisher, you have a composer who has a desperate desire to set Psalm 23, that comes to me, and we're happy to deal with it. If you're doing a book of reflections and you want them in there, Psalm reflections, that comes to me. We are not permitting at present any complete collections of the Psalter. There's only one complete collection of the Psalter at the present time, and it is unlikely that that will change in the near future. Moving on to my great love, the New American Bible and the Confraternity of Christian Doctrine, or the CCD. Yes, the CCD class you went to as a child actually did stand for something. The Confraternity of Christian Doctrine, which goes all the way back into the 1500s, in the United States into the 1800s. The Confraternity is the copyright holder for the New American Bible Revised Edition, the NABRE or NABR, and all the previous editions. Also for the Lectionary for Mass, the LFM. Those permissions come through me, the same 15 to 20 business day turnaround time. We typically do better than 15 to 20 days. I just want to be really clear on that. We do our very best to do better than 15 or 20 days, but I just don't want people to be caught in a lurch. I know publishers, it's very difficult and challenging to keep things moving, especially these days. You want, with so many printers having disappeared, you can't afford to lose your print slot. So I don't want to be the reason anyone loses their print slot. I also don't want to work 38-hour days. So the more time you can leave me, the better. Also, the CCD was the copyright holder for the Baltimore Catechism. For some unknown reason, I've had a lot of questions about that lately. The Baltimore Catechism in all of its editions is in the public domain. It passed into the public domain before I came to the USCCB. So that is in the public domain at this point. I get the occasional question on the next slide about the Lectionary for Masses with Children, the LMC. The text of that belongs to the American Bible Society, or the ABS, because it shouldn't be without an acronym. No new licenses are being granted for that complete work. The publishers who already have it continue to produce it, can continue to produce it and make it available, but no new licenses are being granted for that because its confirmation status with the Holy See is sort of not tremendously clear, I guess is the nicest way to put it. So what's out there is out there. That's fine. If you wanted to do a couple of readings from it in a children's book, for example, that would be fine, but that request would go to the American Bible Society, not to us. Also, what a lot of people are not aware of is the lectionary for Masses with Children is not a full lectionary. When it was designed, there is a volume for each year of the Sunday cycle, ABC. Not all of those days have a first reading, a psalm, a second reading, and a gospel. In some cases, one of the readings was omitted because it was considered too challenging for children or inappropriate for children. That's the reality. For weekdays, there are seasonal settings for Mass. There is, for example, no set of readings for Tuesday of the second week of Advent. That's not an option in the lectionary for Masses with Children. There are 2 or 3 settings for Advent, Masses during Advent. There are a couple for Masses during Christmas season. There are a couple for Masses during Lent. There are a couple for Masses during Easter. There are quite a few for Masses during ordinary time that are themed. There are some other themed Masses or special days, but there is not a children's parallel to every day in the lectionary. And that doesn't really affect permissions, but I get a lot of questions about from people about how to find the children's readings for this particular day in Lent. And the short answer is they're not there. So I like to make sure I let people know that, because if you're looking for it, you're never going to find it. So just give yourself a break. Now let's look at some other translations that are particular Bible translations, since not everybody uses the NAB all the time. I don't know why, but not everybody does. So let's go deep into the acronym-rich RSV, NRSV, RSV2CE. The RSV and the NRSV are copyrighted by the National Council of Churches of Christ, the NCCC USA, which is the best acronym we have here because it has the most letters and the most repetition. Their permissions are handled through a separate rights management organization, Reagan's Rights Management, and you can reach them online and work with them. They do a lot of their work online, easily accessible. The RSV2CE is handled through Ignatius Press, which tragically does not have an acronym. But you can reach them, go through Ignatius Press, and they handle all copyright questions for the RSV2CE. Some other Bibles you might want to use: the Jerusalem and the New Jerusalem Bible, or the NJB. In the United States is handled by Doubleday, Random House, out of New York. So if you want to go outside the United States, then you're probably going to go through Darton Longman Todd out of England to get the Jerusalem. The Good News Bible, or the GNT, or the TV, those are all handled through the American Bible Society, the ABS. The English Standard Version, which has finally been published in a Catholic edition and is actually used liturgically in India, not the United States, but in India. And it has the imprimatur of the Indian Bishops' Conference. That is handled through Crossway, which is an independent evangelical publisher in the United States. Most Spanish Bibles are held in Spain, and you basically have to look at which the Bible translation is and go to that Spanish publisher. Each one of them handles their permissions completely differently. Most of them are reachable via the internet. Ediciones de Verbum has one translation that gets used a lot. There are quite a few others. There is no consistency about how those are handled. And most permissions that go to Spain take a fairly long time to come back. That is our experience. But you can try. There are lots of wonderful Spanish translations. None of those are in lectionary approved for liturgical use in the United States at the present time. Spain, the Episcopal Conference of Spain, as I said, does have a liturgical Bible. That is not only the Psalms are used liturgically in the United States. So the Spain lectionary would not be something you would be using in the United States. They do have a liturgical Bible, though, that is pretty complete that you might want to use. There is also something I've gotten some questions on lately, the Biblia de Iglesia en America, the BIA, because I was involved with it. So, of course, it has an acronym. I have to give everything an acronym. The Biblia de Iglesia en America is currently published in Latin America, and Salem handles its permissions. Salem is not permitted to grant permissions for its publication in the United States. If you have, I don't know that anyone's gotten a permission that says they can publish it in the United States. If you do, it is not valid. Please contact me and we'll see if we can fix this for you, okay? But the US CCB holds the copyright on this text around the world. Its licensing in Latin America goes through Salem and in Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, the Caribbean. Everywhere else it comes through the US CCB. At present, we are not granting permissions because the US edition of the BIA will be slightly different than the Salem edition because we intend it to be for liturgical use. So we need to make accommodations to the text so that it can be approved liturgically. That work is currently underway. In fact, a substantial portion of the work on the New Testament is already complete. It would be basically done, but unfortunately, one of the scholars engaged in that effort tragically caught the novel coronavirus and was quite ill for a fairly extended period of time. It's better now, is recovering well, but got a little bit behind on most things. And so we had to grant someone extended deadline to finish that work. We are hoping that it will be available soon. Once that work is, the goal is that the team will complete their work next year, Old and New Testament, and it will go to the bishops, and that the bishops will be able to complete their work on it fairly quickly and get it to the Holy See. Archbishop Gomez, the current president of the USCCB, has been one of the great lights behind this work and has worked very, very hard on getting this Bible available. So he really, really, really wants to see it come out while he's president of the USCCB so he could sign its imprimatur. He'll be president until November of 2022. So we'd love to have it out by then. And of course, once that is available as a Bible, the permissions will come through my office. And ultimately, it will also be the liturgical text. So it will go in all US editions of various liturgical books and a lectionary in Spanish for the United States will finally, for the first time, be created. I cannot tell you what a huge moment that will be. We have never had our own Spanish leccionario. And there will be one leccionario that will be used in the United States in all Spanish masses. It will be consistent. It will be based on a Bible that people can buy and read at home. It will be able to be used in catechetical texts. And it will be a Bible that people in Latin America will be familiar with because the same Bible, basically the same text is available there. The changes that we're making are like literally handfuls of words. It's not like huge, huge quantities of stuff. It's like handfuls of words here and there that will be changed just for accuracy issues and for consistency with the Greek and Hebrew. So that will be a huge day. My goal is that will all happen before I retire, and that we'll have a new lectionary for Mass based on the revised NAB. We'll have a new leccionario. We'll get all of those out, make them available to the world, and then I will go and retire to a small island somewhere where no one can find me. That would be the goal. And then somebody else will get all of your permissions requests and all of your questions, which I am now ready to receive. So if you have a question about another text that I didn't mention, or a question about something that I did mention and that I wasn't clear enough about, or that I didn't hit your issue, please feel free to ask. Because I'm working off of the app, any question you send, Therese will have to send me through chat, so there'll be a little bit of a delay, which is why at this point I'm basically vamping.
Yeah, you don't need to vamp much longer, Mary. We do have a couple of questions already.
Okay.
And so I'm going to just read them out so everybody can hear them. They're both about timelines, so I'll give them to you separately. The first is, what is the timeline for the Spanish language lectionary for use in the U.S.? I'm going to assume that's the Biblia de la Iglesias that you just talked about.
The Biblia de Iglesia en America, we are hoping the current timeline, and keep in mind, this timeline was set before there was this like little pandemic you might have heard of. So it's a little bit questionable, although none of the scholars can travel anywhere this summer or go to conferences. So we're hoping they're working really hard at home. We're hoping to have that to the bishops in 2022 for their approval. Then it will have to go to the Bible will have to go to the Holy See for the Confirmatio. While that's at the Holy See for the Confirmatio, we'll be getting ready to make it into a leccionario. When the Confirmatio comes back, and I gotta say this, Spanish tends to come back faster than English. Don't know why, it just does. People who work on it are faster, they got more of them, I don't know. Once that comes back, we'll build a lectionary out of it. And then that has to be approved by the bishops and confirmed. So best case scenario, 2025?
Okay.
2024, 2025. But we've got a process in place. We're ready to start it. And for those of you who are music publishers, we have had some composers who work in Spanish, about 10 of them, I guess, 10, 12 of them, look over the text of the Book of Psalms as it stands right now and provide us with their comments on the text to make sure that it is something that is settable and beautiful and usable. And I got to tell you that right now, for the most part, the reviews that we've seen are very, very positive.
Okay.
So
good.
What was the other timeline question?
Yeah, second question about timelines. So what is the timeline for the new English lectionary with the APC?
About the same, 2025-ish.
Okay.
No, I'm not at all worried about two brand new lectionaries hitting my desk at the same time. Not even a little bit.
Okay.
I'm trying to store sleep now because basically 2024, I'm not going to sleep.
That would not be unusual. Okay, a different question from a slightly different direction. Would a board book intended for children to take to Mass with them that is mostly prayers from the Mass be considered quote unquote liturgical? Would it need approval by the Bishop's Committee on Divine Worship?
Yes, because it uses liturgical text, they're going to have to sign off on it. Now, board book for kids, it's not going to take terribly long. I mean, most board books for kids are not exactly text heavy. At least not the ones that I've read. That'll go pretty fast. And they're going to look to make sure that words aren't changed. I mean, this is going to sound crazy to you, but I literally had something that came to me once where somebody changed the words of the prayers of the Mass because they were too hard for kids. And just publishing them with completely different words. They got to know for a fairly obvious reason, I would hope. But, that stuff does come across our desks. So that's why they have to look at it. It is amazing sometimes.
Okay. This is a clarification question. So, could you clarify the type of resource receiving ISIL permission, which also requires BCDW approval? Specifically, would a baptism preparation guide for parents require BCDW approval?
Yes, for the simple reason that all ISIL contracts, every single ISIL contract includes a term that makes that contract contingent upon the approval of the local Episcopal Conference. So ISIL can grant their permission, but their permission is not effective until and unless the local Episcopal Conference, which in the United States is represented by the Secretariat for Divine Worship. They've been the people deputed for the USCCB to okay things. Their contract simply isn't valid until that permission is granted. So you do want to go to the BCDW and get their sign off, and that makes having their email that says we're okay with this, go ahead, is what makes your ISIL contract legit. It's what puts the little stamp on it so you can move forward.
Okay, so follow-up question to this. Even if ISIL signs a permission request and doesn't issue the standard ISIL contract?
If it's fair use, it's fair use.
Okay.
Fair use, I mean, fair use doesn't require copyright permission. So, let's be real. If you're using, the Lord be with you and with your spirit is something we say at Mass every Sunday. You probably don't need to go to the BCDW for that. If you're, reprinting, a magnum opus that has, that reprints the Sanctus and the Lamb of God, you're probably fine. But like go back to the board book for children to carry to Mass. You do need to go to them, even if you're just using a little bit. I mean, you need to use your good judgment here. If something is clearly fair use, then copyright permission isn't required. On the other hand, I'll be honest, BCDW is pretty fast. When they don't get back to you within a week or 10 days, it's usually because there's a really odd problem. And that's why I suggest that people CC me on them so I'm aware of it. And if you haven't heard in 10 days or 2 weeks, 2 business weeks, you drop me a note and I'll go check up on where things are. Occasionally something will fall through the cracks. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't. We're all super busy and we're all understaffed. I'm short a person, BCDW is short a person. And, it's just, I'm not going to fill for at least a year and a half. BCDW position is hard to fill. It'll take a while. So, things do fall through the cracks. Pretending otherwise would be ridiculous. But we can find those things. It's better to ask and not need than to not ask and need. Because if there are significant errors, you want to know that they're there. Or if the bishops are going to have a significant problem with something, you probably want to know that before you print in 3,000 of them.
Okay. Another question is related to the BCDW, and this I think is probably just it's an alphabet soup clarification kind of question.
Oh.
What is the relationship between the BCDW and the USCCB? And the questioner says that I've gotten letters of approval from the Secretariat of Divine Worship, but it has a USCCB logo, so I don't really understand that.
The BCDW, the Bishops' Committee on Divine Worship, is one of the standing committees of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. The USCCB has something like 25 standing committees. The Committee on Evangelization and Catechesis, the Committee on Cultural Diversity in the Church, the Committee on Ecumenical and Interreligious Affairs, the Committee on Doctrine, and the Committee on Divine Worship is one of those committees. So they are, the Secretariat for Divine Worship is the staff to the Bishops' Committee on Divine Worship. They are employees of the USCCB, and the BCDW is a standing committee of the and an organ of the USCCB.
Cool. Any other questions? I have one concluding question that I'm going to ask you because it's just fun. And that's,
Oh, good. I like that.
I thought you might. What are the Capitals' chances of winning the Stanley Cup this year? Mary's a huge hockey fan guy, folks.
I'm really torn on this because I'm not convinced they should be playing, given the sheer number of players that have tested positive and the people who have had to opt out to protect their families. I have really mixed feelings. I mean, as much as I love hockey, I have really mixed feelings about them even playing. But on the other hand, they're practicing it at the Iceplex right now, and Ovi's still shooting from the office. And as long as he can make that one-timer from the office, I think they've got at least as good a shot as anybody else in the game.
Oh, to be a resident of Washington and actually have championship teams again. What a joy. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mary.
And I want to thank my dog for not barking even once during this entire webinar. She has been absolutely perfect, and I did not have to bribe her with food.
Yeah, she was very active and engaged yesterday when we practiced. So thank you, Mary, for all of your expertise. Thank you to all of you as participants. The video of this webinar will be available, like I said, within the next couple of hours at the catholicpublishers.org website. If you click on webinars in the main navigation line, it will take you to the page with all of our webinars. Please feel free to view any of the training sessions that we've had recently and those that we've had in the last couple of years. You may find something of interest there as well. Again, thank you for participating, and we hope to see you back. Thank you all. Bye-bye.